Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Birmingham Bible Church Worldwide. We'd like to welcome you from wherever you are. We'd like to welcome all of our global partners. We welcome you. We welcome those who are watching from Georgia, from Florida, and other states. Thank you so much for joining us. And that's right, everyone. Right here, it is 12 noon here in Birmingham, Alabama. Could be morning time wherever you are. But this is our segment called Winning Wednesday. And so every Wednesday at 12 noon, we like to do a couple of things. We like to encourage you by letting you know that, number one, you can do all things through Christ who gives you your strength, that you are a winner, and that you have the victory. And you may ask, well, victory over what? Victory over any battle, any obstacle, any circumstance that you are facing right now at this moment. And we also like to take this time to encourage you and to educate you just on certain topics that are going on either with you or that's going on in society as a whole. And so if you are new, we are on Facebook. Of course, we are BHAM Bible, formerly known as the Church Away International. We are on YouTube at BHAM BC. We are on Twitter at TCOWI.org. And then we are on Instagram at BHAM BC. So for those of you, I'm sure many of you know that this Saturday is June the 19th. And normally it is a time that's celebrated with parades and festivals. I've seen all kind of advertisements of things that's going on in parks. And so it is a time that we as Blacks, as African Americans, celebrate something called Juneteenth. But what does it mean? And I don't know if you are like how I was in high school. I never knew about Juneteenth. I never knew about some of the massacres that have occurred amongst our people. And so, of course, I attend Google University. And so I had to Google it and just see just kind of what it meant, what some of these other things mean. And so y'all don't want to hear me talk about it. So we brought Dr. Weems come on to talk about it. He's going to educate us. He is a professor at Wichita University. He has authored many publications, spoken at numerous events in numerous places. And so we're going to let him give y'all more informative and up-to-date information more than I could. And so welcome. Hello, Dr. Weems.
Hello, hello. How you doing, First Lady Pam?
I'm doing great. I'm doing great. Thank you for joining us here today. Thank you so much. And so we appreciate you doing this for us. So why don't we go ahead and let you get started on talking about Juneteenth?
Okay. Wow, it's almost like, where do you begin? And looking at Juneteenth right now, this is really an historic moment because as some of you probably know, last night, the US Senate unanimously voted to make Juneteenth a national holiday. And from this point, it has to go through the House of Representatives, and that really should not be a problem, because if it could go through the Senate unanimously, it should breeze through the House as well. And clearly, this is a bill that President Biden will sign. So this is very historic on a number of levels. And I just want to start today by just giving a brief historical overview in terms of how Juneteenth came about. And we know that the date, June 19th, 1865, is very significant. But in order to really get into a a deeper meaning of Juneteenth, we have to literally go back to January 1st, 1863, when President Abraham Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation. And I'm assuming everybody has at least heard of the Emancipation Proclamation in school or have read about it. But there's some real interesting dynamics when we put it in its historical context. Technically, while the Emancipation Proclamation was a very important document which pretty much stated that slaves or people who were enslaved in the Confederate States of America would be free. Technically, at the time, that was kind of a bogus document, in that when we look at the Confederate States of America, they, in their mind, had literally become another country. That would be as if, the President of the United States today would issue an edict that would have effect in Canada. That wouldn't make sense, because Canada is a sovereign nation. The Confederates in 1863 felt that they were a sovereign nation, but that document and that proclamation pretty much set the stage for how the Union would handle the Confederacy as military battles began to go the Union's way during the course of the Civil War. Because one of the things that occurred as the Union Army became increasingly successful as the war went on and they took over Confederate states, one of the things that they took over in these states, or took control of, were enslaved people. And again, under the dictates of the Emancipation Proclamation, when Union armies went into various southern states, one of the things that immediately happened was that the enslaved people in those areas became free. Now, this brings us to the question of Texas and the whole birth of Juneteenth. Now, when we look at history, the Civil War actually ended on April 9th, 1865. That's when General Robert E. Lee officially surrendered to General U.S. Grant at the Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia. However, we're talking about the days before telephones, the internet, Google, or what have you. So in Texas, which was pretty much the most remote Confederate state, a word immediately did not get to the enslaved people in Texas that, in fact, the Civil War had ended and that the Confederates had lost. And it literally wasn't until a couple months later, when you had Union Army officers show up in Galveston, Texas, issuing Special Order Number 3, pretty much stating that slavery was officially over in Texas. And needless to say, there was a great deal of jubilation when the ex-enslaved people at that point heard that, they were no longer slaves. But again, this speaks, I think, to another broader issue when we look at the institution of slavery, in that slave owners were very, very reluctant to give up that special status they had, because white slave owners were aware that the Civil War had ended, but they chose not to reveal that fact to their enslaved people until they were literally forced to, when General Gordon Granger showed up in June of 1865 to issue Special Order Number 3. Looked like you were about to ask me a question, First Lady.
Oh no,
I was looking at it, looked like you.
No, I was just thinking because, the slave owners they knew that, they wouldn't have anybody to work their cotton fields. And so, yeah, they didn't want to give that up.
Oh yeah. Well, again, from their particular standpoint, they tried to hold out as as long as possible. If you, in the fact that literally enslaved people in Texas did not know that the Civil War had ended until a couple months after the fact, that is very significant in its own right. Now, when we look at Juneteenth and how it was subsequently celebrated over time, needless to say, when we look at Texas, African Americans in Texas pretty much were in the forefront of celebrating this particular holiday. And it's interesting too, in sort of looking at how Juneteenth evolved as a holiday in the African American community. It began after was acknowledged in Texas. Uh, by the early 20th century, it had spread to other parts of the South. Uh, Interestingly enough, I grew up in Chicago, and uh, as late as the 60s, uh, there were no real celebrations of Juneteenth in Chicago. In fact, I didn't really learn about Juneteenth myself until at the time in the mid 70s, I was living in Milwaukee, and they had a parade and a big celebration there. So it's interesting in that it was sort of an uneven celebration of Juneteenth uh, for a long section of time. And I'm kind of curious, First Lady Pam, in Birmingham, to the best of your knowledge, what type of local celebrations of Juneteenth were they, for instance, say when you were growing up?
And so well, my family and I, we've lived here maybe for about 10 years, since 2008. So a little bit over 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm just now realizing that they have some Juneteenth celebrations. Now, I was raised in South Georgia, and there was no Juneteenth celebration. Like I said, I never even heard about it um, until recently, which was one question I was going to ask. It seemed like it's getting more recognition lately, and maybe as you continue to talk, just is it due to the George Floyd situation? Is it some pinpoint? I know you said you didn't hear about it till the 70s, but as far as Alabama, and I don't know, prior to us moving here, if there was anything, but as far as I know, recently, it's just been the Juneteenth celebrations. It's always, always have something around February, the month of February, of course, uh, 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 um, Black History Month, but not much for Juneteenth.
Yeah, it's a real interesting phenomenon when we talk about how Juneteenth historically has been recognized. In Texas, it's been a big deal uh, forever. Because in fact, Juneteenth, in terms of the African American community there, it is, all types of things that have been going on literally again since uh, the late 19th century. You mentioned George Floyd and the aftermath of that. I think that definitely helped to uh, enhance people's knowledge and appreciation of certain aspects of African American history. And again, this whole notion of freedom, because some people would argue today that African Americans are not totally free in many regards. Some of us still unfortunately commit the crime of, or the quote unquote crime of driving while black, walking down the street while black, and running the risk of being hassled. But again, when we look at the question of Juneteenth and that question of freedom, I think it's very important, for us as African Americans and for Americans as a whole to really sort of reflect on the institution of slavery and how that was such an integral part of American history, because you couldn't have a Juneteenth Liberation Day unless you were liberating people from something. And again, I think from my own perspective as a historian, I think one of the positives that will come out of Juneteenth being a national holiday will be there will be a greater appreciation and a greater acknowledgement of the institution of slavery, because I don't think we can overestimate the very negative and lingering negative reverberations that the institution of slavery had on people of African descent in this country. Because when you really sit back and reflect on what we have gone through as a people over the past 400 years, it's miraculous on one level that we're still here. Again, when you consider all the stresses and strains that people of African descent have undergone, and there have been a lot of forces over time that have tried to tell us as a people, well, get over it. That's in the past, But again, no one, for instance, tells the Jewish people to forget the Holocaust, because to their credit, they make a point, we will never forget. And I think when we look at, African Americans and we talk about slavery, I think Juneteenth, among other things, will really help magnify the significance of slavery and it's still lingering, reverberations in our community.
And you bring a point. So one thing I've been saying for years, and I don't know how possible this will ever be, but it seems like we need a curriculum that's implemented into our high schools, that's required to graduate, to inform everyone about stuff like this, because there are some people out there who just don't know. They don't know the details of slavery. And I'm talking about those who are, of our counterparts. And so they do stuff like hold a national Republican convention in Tulsa on June 19th. And I think if you know some of this information, you'll begin to appreciate somewhat um, the struggle of slavery and why we're so pushing stuff like Juneteenth and pushing tearing down the monuments of Confederacy.
Yes, it's interesting that you raise that point, because as we speak, there are efforts in a variety of states to pretty much do away with courses related to African American history and what have you, and instituting quote unquote patriotic history curriculums, all with the intent not to talk about the impact of slavery and its centrality to the development of America. My research specialty is, business and economic aspects of the African American experience and American history as well. And history is very clear that without the use of enslaved African labor, America would have developed far differently economically. And there's this sort of myth that whites, like to believe that, they did it all by themselves and, self-reliance and pulled themselves up by their bootstraps. And historical record is crystal clear in that regard. And there's so much about slavery, again, that is an embarrassment to America as a democratic nation. And some people, rather than deal squarely with the truth, want to not deal with the truth and, sweep it under the rug. The fact that many of the quote unquote founding fathers of the United States were slave owners. You know, that's a historical truth, but that's something that some people, for a variety of reasons, do not want to face that truth. So again, I think the fact that Juneteenth being will soon be officially a national holiday, that's very exciting on a variety of levels. But I think it will help this country to hopefully begin what they called in South Africa, truth and reconciliation efforts. That in order to really move beyond the past, you have to face it squarely. You can't sort of live in a fantasy world that never happened, or trying to push things under the rug, because truth has a way of making its way into our minds and to our lives.
Mhm. And you're right, because you have the powers that be that are trying to, bury certain events and bury, the fact that slavery built this country. It was built on the blacks. It was built on the backs of slaves and those who were enslaved. And so, they tried to bury those events. And I guess I don't know if it's just too horrific and they don't want to think about it. Maybe they just want us to get over it, but it's very hard to get over it because we could be so much further along had certain things just been implemented and certain things were done away with. And so let me ask you this. What does, since Juneteenth is about to be a holiday, what does that mean for us now? Because for me, I think it means that um, those who have the power and wealth in this country can now, once they think about, oh, well, let me see what Juneteenth is since it's about to be a holiday. And then once they research that, then they'll research slavery and what happened to slaves. Then they'll develop an interest in it. And then maybe since they have all the wealth and power in this country, then maybe reparations can begin. Or what do you think on that?
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that point, because when we look at the spring of 1865, one of the truly eventful periods in American history, Juneteenth, uh, officially coming to being on June 19th in Texas. As I mentioned earlier, on April 9th, the Civil War officially ended. But there was an event that occurred in March of 1865 that ties in directly to the point you just made, especially as it relates to reparations. On March 3rd, 1865, Congress passed legislation called the Freedmen's Bureau Bill. And among other things, this bill established a government entity called the Freedmen's Bureau, whose primary purpose was to help the ex-enslaved population make the transition from being enslaved people to being free people. And the Freedmen's Bureau, they were involved in various educational programs. But there was an economic underpinning to the Freedmen's Bureau bill. In fact, Congress realized that, in fact, African Americans had worked for free as slaves for centuries at that point. And there was a belief in Congress that the ex-enslaved population should be entitled to some type of compensation for that. And part of the Freedmen's Bureau bill it called for 40 acres of land to be given to African American families. There was no mention of the mule in the mention and initially this land wasn't necessarily to be given to the ex-slave population. It was to be given to them at very reasonable rates. It wasn't like a grant of land, but it was stipulated that this population there was the Homestead Act, in fact, giving land or making land available at discounted rates to some in the audience might be coming from to be given to the ex-slave population. And the answer to that question was that, during the Civil War, as time went on, by 1865, they had millions of acres of land that they had in fact confiscated. So it was from this land that these 40-acre plots were sold to the African American population. For a variety of reasons, we don't have enough time to go into all the circumstances not happen. But the fact that we're still talking about reparations in 2021, speaks to the fact that people of African descent centuries of free labor. And again, it remains to be seen. We're still having that debate, 150 some odd years later. Again, just shows the importance. And also the fact that at the end of slavery, when Congress, in fact, to its credit at the time, saw relation between and in fact, America, the more property you have, the more you can vote freedom, and vice versa. If you have very little or no, as much as you would if you indeed did have land or property.
So let me ask you, Dr. Weems, since you said that this is like a 150-year-old, struggle, what can we do, I guess, as voter constituents, to, appeal to those who are in politics, um, to get this done, to make this happen? Not saying that, and I'm sure some of us would like $1 million, but how can we as African Americans appeal to those who are in politics and say, hey, we really need to get you all to, give us land at a discounted rate, like you said, maybe don't give it to us, but at least provide some things for us so that it's not the opposite. You're not charging us high interest rate and charging somebody else a lower interest rate. How can we make sure that we're getting our fair shake here in life?
Yeah, that's a real great question. And there's been, a long-standing debate, about the specifics of potential reparations. Some have argued that, cash payments would be appropriate. There have been others that have argued that you really can't put a price, if you will, on what our ancestors went through. And it's sort of an alternative viewpoint, because we know, for instance, during slavery, our ancestors were consciously kept illiterate. And education historically has been, a central part or a central goal in our community. And some have argued that, a form of reparations would be to supply, free education to, qualified African American students on all levels of education, from up through getting a doctorate or a MD degree or a law degree or what have you. So yeah, again, that this whole question of how will reparations be administered. Another thing that's really fascinating, because again, in my own research, I've been kind of exposed to some of this discussion. Some have argued, well, if there's cash payments, should that be sort of means based? Specifically, should Oprah get the same amount that say you and I get
Well,
in terms of possible payments? So again, it's a lot more, as you can see, hopefully, the question of reparations has a lot of interesting nuances to it in terms of, how it would be administered. But I think first and foremost, there needs to be a consensus that some type of compensation is indeed merited. Because right now, there's a battle in Congress as to whether or not there'll be an establishment of a commission to even explore the issue of reparations. And that's not even talking about passing a reparations bill, but even to have a commission to explore whether or not reparations would be feasible. And needless to say, if you have some people that are, want to deny, the impact of slavery, these people are definitely going to, be against, reparations or some form of compensation. But be that as it may, I think that Juneteenth, going back to our original point today, the fact that Juneteenth will be a national holiday that will be directly linked with the institution of slavery. I think, among other things, this will definitely increase attention on these sort of sidebar issues, such as reparations.
and we have a college student, so I am all in favor of free education. As you were talking, before you even said, I said, you know what, we should get free education for all those who, you have just very smart and bright Black students and just cannot go to college because of monies, and so I am totally with that. But you're right. But I'm thinking that as people get educated on Juneteenth and what it means, that maybe that can start the chain of, being compensated for somewhat. Like you said, nothing can probably fully compensate what our ancestors went through with slavery and through slavery. But something could be done. So maybe this Juneteenth will start the conversation on that. So I'm full agreement on that. So yes, sir. So is there anything else, Dr. Weems, you want to add about Juneteenth? This is a great topic. One other thing I want to add, because I did not realize, well, I realized it maybe about 15 years ago, and I was in a dentist's office and I was picking up this book, and it was about the history of America, and did not know that back in the day, Republicans were for African Americans. Like they wanted to end slavery. Is that true? Around this time of Juneteenth and the Civil War?
Yeah, that's a great point. And in fact, I think a lot of people today would, considering what the Republican Party represents today, would be perhaps shocked to find out that the Republicans were in sort of the political forefront of promoting African American rights. However, there was self-interest, perceived self-interest in that regard from the standpoint of the Republican Party. When we go back to the 1860s, uh, the Republican Party at that time was primarily a Northern-based party. There were very few Republicans in the South. The South was a Democratic, stronghold. Now, at the end of the Civil War, Republican strategists came up with the idea that the best way we could expand our geographic reach as a party would be to, in fact, bring in the newly freed Black population into the body politic as Republicans. And indeed, when we look at the 13th Amendment and the 14th Amendment, we saw, Republicans pretty much pushing forward these projects. And to be clear, there were some Republicans at the time who were called the quote unquote radical Republicans that believed that, you know, African Americans should be treated equally as whites. But there were the majority, if you will, that saw the political benefits to the Republican Party for pushing, African American inclusion in politics and as voting. And indeed, when for instance, today there's an entity called the, Congressional Black Caucus. The historical predecessor to today's historical Black Caucus was established in the late 1860s and early 1870s. And all of these individuals were Republicans. In fact, the vast majority of African Americans were Republicans. Now, this began to change in the 1870s, is that while most people today would not associate the Republican Party with African Americans, they would associate the Republican Party with business. And early on, one of the Republican Party's missions, along with promoting Black rights, was to reunite the country's economy. Because during the Civil War, the Northern and Southern economies had pretty much been disrupted. And the term Reconstruction, among other things, called for reconstructing the Northern and Southern economies. Now, by the mid 1870s, you had, again, Southern business people, most of whom had been ex-slave owners, that pretty much came to the Republican Party and said that, we're on board with, your efforts to reunite Northern and Southern business interests, but we have a big problem with your promotion of Black political rights. And indeed, by the mid 1870s, the Republican Party was faced with a dilemma. On one hand, they saw it in their best interest to promote Black political rights, but at the same time, they saw that promotion of Black political rights was posing a problem to reuniting Northern and Southern business interests. In the end, we saw Republicans choosing to focus on reuniting Northern and Southern business interests. And ultimately, we saw their interest in Black people and Black voting pretty much disappear. And that helps to explain why pretty much a decade after the end of the Civil War, we saw Southern states begin to move Black people off the voting rolls. And again, it's sort of an irony here that right now we're talking about Republican efforts to, in fact, move people, Black people, off the voting rolls today.
Wow.
But yeah, long-winded answer to your question. But yeah, most people today might be shocked to
Right.
know this early history of the Republican Party as it relates to Blacks.
Right. Well, Dr. Weems, you have presented, and you are very knowledgeable on this topic. No answer is too long-winded here. No, it's too long-winded because we need to know. Another, and this probably maybe my last question here. So, how can we educate our children? Because that's one thing. Because it was never taught to us, not in this detail. We really, especially my husband and I, really try to educate our children on it without being, because we understand they go to school with a lot of different races of people. We don't want them to become just so angry and upset with their counterparts. And so, but how can we educate our children on the things that African Americans have gone through, just their history, not just Juneteenth, Black Wall Street. Didn't know there was so many other massacres that have happened in the United States that have been linked to, Black people and trying to, not only assassinate them, but their businesses as well. And so, how can we, as parents or as churches, educate our future generation so that history doesn't die?
Great question. And fortunately today, there are an increasing number of good documentaries that relate to, various aspects of the African American experience. For instance, there were several documentaries associated with the Tulsa massacre that were shown recently. And there's a number of, again, good documentaries that it could be a good family evening. Because I've, my own family, we've, sat around and looked at documentaries or other quote unquote educational things and talk about them afterwards. That's a great way. Another thing, and just a sad reality, I think even in 2021, but was similar reality back in the day when I was in high school, is that a lot of times school districts are not going to teach substantive African American history. So as someone who's interested in the subject matter, you pretty much have to go out on your own. That's the beautiful thing about the public library, or, Amazon. There's all sorts of venues where you could, get this material. Sadly, in 2021, for the most part, you have to take that initiative to do it yourself. But again, there are a variety of venues. And I'm glad you raised that question, in that as someone that currently teaches at a university level, but also taught the high school level earlier in time, those Black students that are fortunate enough to be able to go to a college or university, today most schools have a variety of courses in African American history where students can get that type of information. But be that as it may, it's kind of a sad reality that you almost have to go to college in order to get, substantive, classroom instruction in African American history. But as I mentioned in the beginning, there are a variety of other resources out here where parents especially could share this information with students. And again, I'm glad you raised that question, because I can remember during the course of my career, more than one occasion where, in one of my African American history classes, I would have a Black student who would come up to me and they would, talk about, revelation this course was. And they made the point that they were kind of angry at their parents because their parents did not share this type of information with them. And I remember, telling students in these instances that, as a parent, part of your role is to try to protect, your child from some of, the bad things associated with life. Because, they're going to find out about those things sooner or later anyway. But again, as a parent, I think it is important for us to, bring these things to young people's attention at a level that they can understand. So as they progress in life, they will be, more prepared for, unfortunately, the slights and discrimination that will come their way at some point in time.
Right. And you're right, because my husband and I, we have 3 sons and a daughter. So we always would have that conversation with our oldest, who's out the house now, but we have two younger ones, age 12 and 10. And so, our job, of course, now is, we're trying to prepare them for, the injustice. Hopefully that won't happen, but that they may
Mhm.
encounter, they won't be shocked by it when they see it. And they also be able to recognize it. I think that's one thing when I was growing up, and just looking back, I'm thinking that was an injustice. Somebody in my family should have said something, spoken up. But now, we're able to tell our children, hey, especially, we live in Alabama, so I'm always nervous, period. But to say, hey, this is an injustice, and so if it is, this is how we need to handle it. But first of all, you got to recognize it. Can't go through life just kind of running through the tulips. That's not how it is. But I will say my husband has been taking he has story time with the children, and one of the books they were going through was called The Undefeated 44. And so it basically goes through different Black Americans who have made it successfully, but it tells them a brief history about them. And so that's kind of, one way that we have instilled. But, and I agree with the documentary, sitting down, looking at that. We've done that with our two youngest boys. And so that is a great way to lead the discussion, I should say, because that way, once you watch the movie, then it can kind of open up, questions for them, still, don't know why it's so hidden. But I will say this: I remember last year we went to the Civil Rights Museum here in Birmingham, and we made it a church function. So we took all the children to the Civil Rights Museum, and while we were there, I thought it was very noble. We saw a white couple taking their teenage son, and he was walking through, and I was like, you know what, that's kind of what needs to happen, is to at least expose everyone of, hey, this is, this is why we are fighting for our rights, to fight against oppression, to fight for the things that for us, because of things that happen, because of the oppression of our people from before now. So I thought that was very noble of them to do that. But why do you think it is so hidden? I guess this information, just culturally.
Well, when we look at what is called American history, uh, especially as it's presented in elementary and high schools, is more in the realm of myth. The sort of George Washington and cherry tree type of stuff, than actual reality. And on one level, I would even use the P word, propaganda, in terms of what is presented and how it's presented to young minds. Uh, you know, when we look at history, history is a reflection of real life, and we know real life has its ups and downs, its beauty, its warts. But when you try to create this artificial, uh, intellectual, historical environment where it's a fairy tale where America's the greatest and America can do no wrong and America has never done any wrong, that really creates, a dangerous environment. And quite frankly, it can lead to a lot of disillusionment, not just among Black people, but among whites, young whites as well. Because when you open your eyes to see what's going on or really going on around you, it's like, well, this is nothing like I was taught. So yeah, I don't know. America, again, from the standpoint of history, has this very, very strange perspective Uh, a lot of it is tied in with notions of white supremacy, because one would argue that that's the core of the American experience. And one might argue that a shorthand version of American history is that, people of European descent stole the land of the indigenous people and brought in people from Africa to develop that land. That's not exactly flattering. That's not exactly a tale of the rise of democracy. So, you have to, you know, and quite frankly, if I was, and as a historian and knowing the power of history, I can understand their motivation for trying to create
Yeah.
these myths about America and its past and its present. But as they say, the truth shall set you free. And if America, and I will say this, America is truly unique in that on this geographic space, unlike any other space in the world, we have people from so many different countries and what have you. And if America can truly come to grips with who it is and what it could be, America, this whole thing about making America great again, that nonsense in that particular context. America really does have a potential for greatness because, again, it could show that people from various parts of the world can come together and work together to make this a strong place. But until this country moves beyond these notions of, white supremacy and everybody else is just sort of an afterthought, uh, America, notwithstanding its wealth, material wealth, is essentially, a morally bankrupt society.
You're right, because if we knew, well, if the curriculum they provided just talked about just the naked truth. I remember one it was a documentary. I forgot the name of it, but this white gentleman was telling a story. His family actually owned slaves, and just some of the stories, not of what his people did, but just certain things they would do to African Americans when they thought they did a crime. I mean, that night I had nightmares. I couldn't even sleep. It was just so horrific. And so you're right. I think it's so hidden because it will really expose the true nature of a lot of them back then. You're right.
Oh yeah, we look at something as wow, wow, yeah, lynching is a classic example, because lynching is kind of portrayed as, yeah, sort of renegade, outlier, good old boys who had a little too much to drink one night and they just, strung up the first black person they saw. While that was a part of lynching, but lynching also were like community events where you'd have hundreds of people,
At
a
the church.
picnic, with
At the
kids.
church. Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. So again, that is, yeah, yeah. What type of, civilized Christian nation, if you will, it engages in that. So again, there's
Yeah.
so much stuff
Hmm.
in America's past that, again, for someone like myself who's a historian, I understand clearly why many of them want to push that to the side and can't even begin to deal with that. But ultimately, until you deal with that, America will never be the country that it could be.
Yeah.
Because America does have a lot of potential.
Amen. You're right. Well, thank you, Dr. Weems. We could keep talking about this stuff and all other kind of stuff. I don't want to take up any more of your time, but thank you so much for giving us this information. I'm just going to provide a few announcements for all of our viewers. If you can just hold tight for a minute while we do this, and then I'll come back to you in just a second. Thank you, everyone, of course, for joining us here at Birmingham Bible Church worldwide. And so, thank you for viewing this segment of What Does Juneteenth Mean? Our theme for this year, don't forget, is Reconstruction 2021. We are believing that God is going to reconstruct everything in your life, in the life of our church family as well. And then, of course, you can watch us on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter, and on Instagram. So make sure you go out there, watch the videos, and also share them with someone as well. Then the church now has an app. We've had an app for quite some time. And so we want to keep you informed on that. But all you have to do is go to your app store, download the My Sunday app, which looks like the icon to your right. And then you will locate Birmingham Bible Church. Remember, My Sunday is one word. Locate Birmingham Bible Church, and then you can watch all of our past videos. You can also look at all of our announcements that are past and current as well. And then if you have a business that you would like to put on our church's website, it's not only a part of our church's website, but it's also part of a national Christian database. All you have to do is go to our website at bhambc.org, click on the business directory link, which is at the bottom, and then fill in your information, and you will be plugged into our business directory on our website and the National Christian Database as well. And then you have just heard from Dr. Robert Weems talking to us about what Juneteenth really means and also other things pertaining to African Americans. So grateful for the information that he gave. Next week, we have Miss Nikki Ivory. He's going to talk to us about summer programs. Our children are out of school, and some of them are involved in camps and in between camps and being at home. She's going to offer us some things that we can do with our children to help keep them educated and engaged. And she also can probably talk about some programs to really teach our children about our Black history as well. So we look forward to hearing from her on next Wednesday at 12 noon, same time, same channels. And then on July the 4th, I drive up worship service. You know, we have it every first Sunday of the month. And so since this next one is on July the 4th, we are going to be celebrating Juneteenth Sunday. And so we're going to offer a free cookout for all. Also, if you notice the shirt that I am wearing, it has July the 4th, but then across it has Juneteenth. One of our very own members, she makes these shirts and also others. So you can contact her, Nikila Robinson Huggins, and she can give you, tell you what all shirts that she has available. But also you can wear African attire if you like as well. But that's going to be July the 4th at our next drive up service at 10 a.m. in the parking lot of C.W. Hayes. And of course, next week, I'm sorry, not next week, tomorrow, we have our small group at 7 o'clock p.m. Our topic is life healing choices. If you are trying to recover from any hurts, any habits, or any hangups, please, you want to be a part of this small group. It's tomorrow at 7. It is a Zoom call. And so, of course, if you want to be present, please contact Lady Pam at ladypam@tcowi.org. Also, just to let you know, we are bringing back our text messages. And so if you like to receive a text message as we give out announcements, we like to share them with you all, any reminders, please text, and these are the letters, BBCWW. So you're going to text BBCWW to this number, 94253. So in the 2 spot on your phone, you'll put in the number 94253, 94253, and then you'll text BBCWW to that number. And then this Saturday, we are so excited. We have a Men's Awareness Summit that's going to be brought to you live, of course, on all of our social media outlets. We have Miss Larissa Strath talking about a man's nutrition, Dr. Lawrence Murray talking about a man and his mental health, and then we have Nellie Harris talking about a man and his facial care, his health care, his outer appearance, and then Dr. Tim Perry talking about a man and his spirituality, Shane Spells talking about a man and his finances, Francis and Bishop Keith Reed talking about just man to man, just stuff that you all need to know. And so that's going to be this Saturday, June the 19th at 10 a.m. It is free to all. And then on the 25th, Friday, that's next Friday at 7 o'clock p.m., it is a ladies' pajama party. We have two wonderful people who are going to tell us women about how hair care is our self-care. So important for women as we continuously make sure ourselves are taken care of. And so this is free to all. It's going to be shown on all of our social media outlets. And then Pastor Mason is continuing the series on the church that Jesus built, really looking at each one of the churches in the book of Revelation. You don't want to miss this. It's every Sunday at 11 a.m. on all of our social media outlets. And listen, BBC Worldwide, for those of you who are global, we have a global prayer room call every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday at 6 a.m. That number is 515-604-9324, and the access code is 381179. And we need everyone to do their part. We need everyone to reach one. If you know of someone who can benefit from all of these announcements that I've just went forth, please make sure you share them with someone that you love. And then thank you for your continuous gifts toward Compassion International. We have now sponsored a total of 11 children that's right there in Haiti. Thank you so much for how you continue to support these children. Of course, your donations go towards their food, their medical supplies, Christian counseling, educational needs, and their physical growth. And then, of course, we are always still believing that God's going to continuously to give us land in the Woodlawn, Birmingham area. And so thank you for those of you who continue to support towards that. We believe in debt-free ministry. And so that's what we continue to do. So thank you so much, everyone, and have an awesome week. And so this is going to be my last question, Dr. Weems, and you let me know if you know or can direct us in the right way. Do you recommend a curriculum for any parents who want to teach their children about African Americans and their history? Okay. Oh, you go. Okay. Oh, you were thinking. Never mind, you were thinking. You're fine. You were thinking.
Okay. Yeah. Depending upon the age of the child, the best sort of survey of African American history is John Hope Franklin's From Slavery to Freedom. From Slavery to Freedom is considered to be the sort of preeminent source related to African American history. And even though I use it at the college university level, but I think it's accessible enough even for high school students. I think that would be a good place to start, because the book has a very nice bibliography, and there's various editions of the book that you could, some earlier editions you could get at a very reasonable price on a used bookstore or Amazon or eBay or what have you. Yeah, that would be sort of my sort of starting point, or just a core thing, because I think, when you have a good core, you can expand out into other areas.
Okay, awesome. Well, thank you so much for this segment that you're doing with Birmingham Bible Church. Any other closing remarks that you would like to share before we dismiss?
I would just urge the viewers is just to stay strong, because notwithstanding the passage of the Juneteenth bill, which clearly is very positive, there's still a lot of negativity that's floating around us. And I would just urge people, and again, being, church community and a Christian community, to just keep your prayer life strong, because we're living through some very interesting times.
Yeah, amen. You're right. Well, thank you so much, Dr. Weems, and we will continue to do that. We will stay strong, and you all stay strong as well over in Kansas. And thank you for giving us your time so that you can tell us about Juneteenth and just some other areas also as well. Thank you so much.
Oh, my pleasure.
Okay. Have a great day.
You too.
All right. Bye-bye, BBC Worldwide. See y'all next time.